If my Walmart cereal aisle story makes you feel like you need a shower, wait until we talk about super shedders. Hey guys, this is Jules with True Crime Reactions. Disclaimer. Everything stated in this video is my opinion and my opinion only, and just like everything else in these cases we discuss here on this channel, everything is alleged. Okay, so while we were doing this live, down in the comments, a viewer left this comment, and it was a link to this article. This article has a whole bunch of other information cited to it, including one of the stories that we went through in the live. But it also has a bunch of other stories about how DNA ended up on crime scenes when it didn't belong there. People that were arrested and almost convicted. One even went all the way to being put in front of a jury. Okay, and he was innocent. Very interesting stuff. So, I actually recorded this earlier today whenever I could only do it off camera. So, my face is going to disappear and we're going to go over this real quick. But interesting stuff. Pay attention. It could be you. It could be any one of us. Okay, guys, so the first story that they actually tell under this secondary transfer incidents portion of this article is the Lucas Anderson story that most of you guys have either heard previously from someone else, read yourselves, or were here for the live where we went over the article written by the Marshall Project about his arrest, because he was arrested for being involved in a murder that he had nothing to do with whatsoever. And his DNA was found on the body of the victim, which is extremely important. So again, some of you may have heard this story, some of you might not have, but that is the story that this starts with. In late November of 2012, a group of men broke into the home of Silicon Valley multimillionaire Ravish Kumara. He and his wife were tied up, blindfolded, and gagged. The men robbed the home and fled. Kumara died because the duct tape used as a gag suffocated him. Santa Clara County Forensic Examiner Tani Nelson Mamet was able to recover enough biological evidence from the gloves, fingernails, and duct tape to conduct DNA testing. She produced 3 profiles. D'Angelo Austin, 22. That DNA was on the duct tape, the mustache. Duct tape, mind you, very immature. Javier Garcia, 21, was on the gloves, the ones that were in a huge pile in the sink, I believe. And 26-year-old Lucas Anderson, whose DNA was on Kumara's fingernail clippings, again, directly on the victim's body. Not the duct tape, not a glove, the victim's body itself. A fingernail, just like I mentioned before in the live, and I've mentioned 1,000 times, whenever you think of DNA on a fingernail, what do you think? Of someone fighting back. You think that the DNA under that fingernail would be extremely important to the murder. No, that wasn't the case in this situation whatsoever. Cell phone tower evidence placed Austin and Javier in the area of the scene, and Austin's sister revealed she had been in a relationship with Kumara for the previous 12 years and provided her brother with the map of Kumara's house. The investigation, aside from the DNA, was failing to connect Anderson to the scene. Just like with Bryan. Nothing in the investigation actually points to Bryan. The only thing that does is the DNA found on the brass button of a knife sheath that was left next to the body of one of 4 victims. Interesting, isn't it? His only other run-in with the law were burglary that appeared to be nothing other than breaking a window during a drunken stupor, and alcohol-related crimes such as drinking in public and riding a bike while intoxicated. Like he had no intention of actually breaking in. He fell in and broke the window on accident because he was too drunk to like walk straight. Which is also how he got into this situation to begin with, okay? Anderson told his public defender, Kelly Kulick, that he didn't do things like the Kumara break-in and murder. I drink a lot, Anderson recalled telling Kulick. Maybe I did it. Anderson's medical records were pulled to use as a possible source of mitigating evidence if he faced the death penalty. Those records showed that Anderson was not only drunk on the night of the crime, but at the time of its commission, he was hospitalized and under 15-minute watches because his blood test revealed he had consumed the equivalent of 21 beers. Home dude had basically just like passed out in the middle of an aisle at some convenience store. Okay. Cops got called. Further investigation revealed that Anderson was picked up off the street by an ambulance crew and transported to the hospital. Coincidentally, it turned out that the same crew responded to the Camara murder scene and attempted to revive Camara. They put the same pulse oximeter on Anderson and Kumara's finger, which is how prosecutors suspect the DNA transferred onto Kumara's fingernails. At least that's their big guess, because that's the only thing that they would have like touched hands, because the ambulance people, like the crew, they're supposed to change their gloves out. Now, could it have been like their hands touched like parts of the little bed thing that's inside the ambulance or another part of the ambulance? Sure, maybe. But 9.5 out of 10, it's that little, pulse reader thingy. After 6 months in jail, Anderson was released. Garcia and Austin were convicted. The sad thing is, I wouldn't be surprised if Anderson actually pleaded to something, said Christopher Givens, Garcia's attorney. They probably would have offered him a deal, and he would have been scared enough to take it. Yeah. And something else, and again, you heard it on the live, or you heard it before, or you're hearing it now. He got no compensation for this, because he was homeless. So technically, him being incarcerated, even though falsely incarcerated, he was being better taken care of at the jail than he would have been able to take care of himself out in the real world. And he's remained homeless after this. This guy hasn't had a bit of good luck, which is like, it's one thing, okay, them not compensating him, which they should have anyway. They should have done something, but they could have at least taken some sort of initiative to like get this guy some help. Because if he was in jail and for 6 months he stayed away from anybody that was actually doing stuff, because yes, drugs and other things do still happen in jail all the time, okay? But if he stayed in there and was clean like the whole time, and then he was just like let out back onto the street, like, I want to say I hope that he stayed sober, but we all know how the, statistics work. So, I mean, it's just kind of crazy to me. They didn't even try to offer this guy any help to, like, get it together. Okay. So this next story is interesting because I'd heard of this one too. I just didn't know the exact details, but I knew the basics of this story. And most of you guys have too, okay? In 2008, DNA had European authorities hot on the trail of the Phantom of the Heilbronn, a suspected serial killer and burglar of mythical stature who robbed jewelers, burglarized cars, and murdered multiple people, including a law enforcement officer. The Phantom left DNA all over the continent, leaving evidence at 40 crime scenes across Germany, France, and Austria. 40, bro. This situation had all of these people in a big old scary tizzy. I can just about imagine. The Phantom was eventually identified, but she was not an international criminal mastermind. She was an elderly Polish factory worker who unwittingly transferred her DNA to the forensic swabs she was manufacturing, resulting in investigators later transferring her DNA to a slew of unrelated crimes across Europe. So her DNA was getting put on the forensic swabs that she was manufacturing as her job. And then in turn, when they would get used at crime scenes, because these would be shipped out to all different countries, her DNA would then get on these crime scenes from thousands and hundreds and thousands of miles away. Isn't that wild? It's wild. So I actually did a little bit of digging because I was curious if they had like a photo of the lady or whatever, right? And they kept showing this photo. This is actually a police officer that died and is one of the cases that was involved in this crazy mishmash, right? Well, one of the things I learned was these were not forensic swabs. Apparently, this factory in, I think, Bulgaria, I think is where it was actually at. They did not ever state that those were for scientific purposes, that they were for forensic swabs or anything like that. They were literally just like normal Q-tip type swabs. So they didn't have any liability whatsoever for all of that wasted money, and neither did she. So much money, guys. So much money on literally nothing. And probably so many people let go. I mean, not probably. For real, though. That's how many cases of horrible criminals that got away with doing horrible things that probably never, ever got caught ever. That's just crazy. Now, this next one is written in here kind of strange because you can tell that they just took like an excerpt from this story, right? So it states Murphy profiled the horrific 2009 murder of a Yale graduate student who was found dead in a mechanical chase behind a wall in a scientific lab. Now, it doesn't get into details on this situation, and for some reason, it does not give the graduate student's name from Yale that they're talking about. But this is the story of Annie Lee. Now, Annie Lee was murdered in September of 2009, and she was working at the New Haven, Connecticut campus of Yale University. She was 24 at the time, and she was last seen in the research building on campus on September the 8th. It wasn't until the 13th, which apparently just so happened to be the exact same day she was supposed to be married. That's the same day that her body was found inside of the building. That is extremely sad. Now, the article goes on to state that DNA obtained from the victim's body and clothing uncovered two unique profiles. One was a co-worker in the lab, and the other was from a local convicted felon. Now, this story is interesting because of how long this person's DNA stayed where they worked, okay? Of course, the convicted felon was considered the prime suspect. He had intimate knowledge of the mechanical chase because he was a construction worker who had worked behind the wall years earlier. The problem with him being the culprit was that the man died 2 years before the murder. Okay? He died 2 years before she was put in that wall. I don't know when he would have worked there, but for the minimum 2 years, his DNA stayed there and was traceable, testable, still solid and viable enough after at the minimum of 2 years, y'all. That's absolutely, absolutely wild. Absolutely freaking wild. The secondary transfer of his DNA was attributed to the fact that he shed skin and sweat cells in the area, and it was closed to traffic and adjacent to a tightly controlled laboratory environment. So it was basically like a perfect environment to basically preserve this man's DNA. That's absolutely insane. The Yale story illustrates how important it is, now that we have the capacity to link perpetrators to an offense by the presence of their DNA in criminal evidence, to understand completely how easy it is for such cells to appear in a sample with which the DNA donor has never come into contact. Because this man died 2 years before she was put there. Yet his DNA was all over her clothes and her body. Absolutely insane to me. Absent a solid alibi, in this case, the irrefutable proof of his prior death, the worker might have ended up implicated in the crime. His familiarity with the space, along with his prior record, might have been used against him to prove that he had special knowledge of a good place to dispose of the body. Now, what ended up happening is that 4 days after her body was found, they ended up arresting a fellow lab tech who worked in the same building as her, named Raymond J. Clark III. And he got 44 years for putting his hands around her neck, doing other things to her, and then, ultimately taking her life. So, yeah. If it wasn't for the fact the other guy was no longer breathing, they most likely would have just contributed all of his DNA on her to the fact they did work in that closed off laboratory environment. If he had a clean record, if there was no proof he'd ever done anything else to her, yeah, the other guy would have definitely been the one facing charges and probably would have gotten a whole lot more than 44 years, honestly. And this part's interesting because it talks about super shedders, which is another interesting concept because we talk about the fact that you can go to Walmart, and you guys are probably sick of hearing this. You go to Walmart, you pick up a cereal box, you pick up a can of cream of mushroom, you go pick up a thing of deodorant because you want to open it up and smell it. How many other noses have smelt that same spot? How many people have picked up that deodorant thing in the exact same way, grabbed the lid the exact same way, popped that lid off, snipped it the exact same way, put the lid back on, put it back on the shelf? How many people do you think picked up that deodorant before you did? Let's just say 5. Well, now you have those 5 people's DNA on your hand, on top of like people's DNA that maybe those people have been around. Or maybe hadn't been around, but picked up from picking up the cereal box before they came to sniff the deodorant. You never know. But it's easily that transferable. And even more so whenever you're something called a super shedder, which is what is so interesting about this next portion of this article. It was speculated that the dead man was what researchers referred to as a good shedder. David Butler, an English cab driver, is also a good shedder. He was targeted by investigators after his DNA was found under a victim's fingernails 6 whole years after she was killed, y'all. This man's DNA stayed under someone's fingernails 6 years after she was no longer breathing. That is wild. Butler had a severe skin condition that earned him the name Flaky. Despite a lack of other evidence tying Butler to the crime, prosecutors were not buying his secondary transfer theory that the victim picked up his DNA while riding in his cab. Fortunately for him, the jury did and acquitted him. So luckily for him, they were able to prove the situation. And because there is nothing else tying him to the crime, just like with Bryan, there is nothing else, according to the state's employees, the Moscow PD employees' own police officers that testified in court, and the defense's own expert that holds the right to change his opinion because he is only looking at the evidence and the facts only. There's nothing else that ties Bryan to this crime besides the DNA. And it turns out it's not as uncommon as some of us originally thought for your DNA to end up somewhere where you never were, and for you to be accused of doing something that you know damn well yo ass didn't do. Absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. Isn't that wild? 2 years. At least 2 years still in the wall. Over 6 years, DNA still on the body. But I guess it makes a lot of sense because they're able to solve a lot of cold cases, right? Do DNA testing on new things. Even now, you guys, they actually did grant one piece of evidence in the Lacey and Scott Peterson case to be retested. So it'll be interesting if they find another DNA on the duct tape. I believe it is, right? Don't hold me to that. I don't know for sure. I just know what I've been scrolling. We might do a video about it, honestly, because I'm hella intrigued. Look, I'm just going to say it out loud, okay? I find it hard to believe that Scott Peterson did this with his own hands, okay? Now, somebody can be responsible for something and not have physically been there to do it, all right? That's one possibility. Also, he just doesn't seem like he could handle it, guys. Like when I've looked at Scott Peterson, I just never got the oh yeah, I could totally see it vibe. I just don't. I just don't. I think he's a loser. I think he was a cheater, a POS. I think all of those things, okay? But you can be a loser and still be an innocent loser, okay? I just don't believe that they looked everywhere that they could have, or I think that maybe they did have a lead of it being something else, but they really, really needed it to be Scott. And it fit. It fit. That's just my opinion. We'll do a video. I've done a couple videos already about it, but we'll do a video about the recent thing because DNA is becoming a really, really, really big situation. It really is. This right here, just the past 2 videos we've done based on stories of DNA have proven to us how easy it actually is for your DNA to end up somewhere where you've never been and get you in trouble for something that you know damn well you didn't do. But your DNA put you there. Nothing else. At least what? At least 2 of these cases, we heard they had literally nothing but the DNA, the same way that we are hearing it about Bryan. That's scary, guys. That's scary, regardless of how anybody feels about this Idaho case. That is scary. Scary. But I want to know what you guys think. Y'all having nightmares tonight too? Because I'm sure I'm going to be. If you like the way that I present this information and give my opinion, please do not forget to leave a like on your way out and subscribe to the channel if you are not subscribed already. See y'all.